Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest installment in our UXDX Online series. We have three amazing presenters who are going to be sharing some really interesting insights in their design process from starting, continuing, all through the kind of the design flow. I think it's going to be a great event, but what I want to do is give a very quick introduction to UXDX and what we're trying to achieve with this series. So our mission at UXDX is to help teams shift from building software products through projects to building them through autonomous empowered product teams. And the reason why that's our mission is because we believe it's a more effective, efficient, and sustainable way to build software when you're in a high change environment. So if you don't have to build much software or it doesn't change frequently, there's no point having a team, a dedicated team sitting there twiddling their thumbs. Use a project structure then. But if you're in a situation where you're constantly changing things and you're always making updates to pretty much all aspects of your product, then that's when that product team structure becomes a lot more efficient and effective. So our speakers are going to be sharing case studies of how they're doing, not the whole gamut of becoming an empowered product team, but I guess in this series, we're going to be focusing in on the design process. But hopefully you'll have some questions coming out of that. And we'd love to hear your questions. So please feel free to either post them in the YouTube chat, on our UXDX website, or wherever you're watching this. The speakers would love to hear them. And if we run out of time, which unfortunately happens sometimes when the questions start coming in, we do have the UXDX community Slack channel. And in there we have the Ask the Speakers channel, where we will post any questions that we don't get time to address during the actual event today. So that's my very quick introduction. So now I'm going to hand over to the speakers. We've had a slight swapping around of speakers, so we're actually going to introduce first Paul Eisen. And Paul is the Solutions Director at Blink, and he's going to be talking about stop sprinting, start designing. So over to you, Paul.
Super, and thank you very much, Rory.
Oh. Apologies.
Just sharing the screen here. Are you not able to hear me?
Yes, yep, I have you now. So that's you ready to go. So thanks very much. Over to you.
All right, so the theme of high change is going to come out quite prominently in this talk. And I think I wanted to start by acknowledging that there's been quite a lot of evolution in UX practices in the past couple of decades. Mainstream popularity of design thinking. We have a much better integration of our creative and our structural and analytic design disciplines to create holistic user experiences. And we have more powerful and efficient tools, particularly for rapid prototyping and for user feedback, so that we can learn faster. And then most importantly, and relative to the topic of rapid change and high change, is we've moved into models that super large delivery. And so what we're focused on is providing incremental functionality to provide incremental value to end users. All of that's on the bright side. There's going to be a but coming here. And as Indira Gandhi cautioned, popularity is not a guarantee of quality. And unfortunately, what I've seen in many of the organizations that I've been working with over the past decade in particular is that we're starting to cut corners. We're in the spirit of rapid deployment of functionality. We are now focused more on incremental delivery. And what I'm noticing is that we're missing often one very critical step in the design process, and that is the high-level design, which establishes the foundations of your design. So before I get into the details of my thoughts around that, I just wanted to sidestep to an analogy here in the urban planning domain. This is a map of part of London. London epitomizes organic growth. that it has evolved essentially, the street architecture has evolved from a cluster of villages and townships. There's actually been little, if any, deliberate macro level city planning of the street architecture. And as a result, this might suit the use case or usage scenario of a tourist wandering aimlessly, looking to come upon surprises and delight. However, for what is considered typically a very important primary usage scenario in navigation of cities is efficient transportation of goods and people. And here, London fails, unfortunately. I'm going to contrast this with the urban grid or other simple geometric structures such as hub and spoke. We're looking here at a historical map of the city of Toronto and the city of Toronto plan. This was actually planned as an urban grid. That's my hometown, Toronto, by the way. And this was planned as an urban grid back in the late 19th century. Here, what we're doing is we're setting up very simple, understandable, and efficient structures for roads and associated infrastructure of utilities, etc., that enable a larger extension of the city to be planned without filling in all the details in the neighborhoods and districts. And as Toronto has grown over the years, this model here can be extended without introducing new conceptual ideas. And so the navigability of the city, notwithstanding the traffic, has been really effective. And I'm going to jump now back into the domain of digital products, where we recognize that in addition to finding things, there's all kinds of other sophisticated ways of interacting with digital products. And they too require planning for ease of extendability and effectiveness. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about that. What I want to do is I want to just look at a bit of a sampling here of the general design processes that we are using to communicate with our clients, to communicate amongst ourselves, with our employers, the various stakeholders who are involved in this. And the design thinking, as we're now recognizing, is becoming more prominent. It's being accepted into many of the organizations in which we work. And it really starts here with establishing an understanding of the problem space through the empathy and experience research that we conduct to extract insights that then allow us to formulate a strategy in the form of design principles or experience strategy, or there's a number of ways we can essentially say, here's what the solution has to do to be effective and to meet the experience outcomes that we understand are important to our end user community and the business outcomes. So I'm going to start walking through some models of this. And the point I want to make out is that there is, among these models that we are using to guide our own design thinking, no attention paid to the importance of planning or architecting the design before we step into the details of design. And that's caused some bad behaviors. One of the bad behaviors that is caused, that I've seen, is that most of our project plans don't include a stage where we actually take the time to create the design architecture or this high-level design. This is the genesis of that double diamond. It's the UK Design Council. It was introduced as a framework for innovation. I can't say enough about how important this is to introduce the human-centered thinking and the empathy and so forth. However, we aren't handed any guidance in this particular model about really how to go about design in a rigorous way that's going to protect us over time as we release individual features and functionality. So you can see some of the items here that are communicated. There's no detail here. If I get into a slightly more detailed representation of the double diamond model, you can see now that we have ideate and prototype. And ideation, always a great thing to be opening up the aperture and considering lateral ideas. Prototyping, I have a concern with that as guidance. prototyping to me is a technique that can be used across the entire design process. I've seen it used effectively in executing foundational research as a point of stimulus in order to open up the lens and understand end user needs and other parts along the process as well. So we need to be a bit more specific here. This is another more detailed view of the design thinking process that was posted by Dan Nestler, and it talks about test and analyze as well. Again, ideate, prototype. This is the general guidance around how we arrive at effective designs. I'm going to turn attention now from the double diamond model to the 5-step linear process that was introduced by Stanford Design School. And again, we have ideate, prototype, and test. There is some guidance around idea generation, about brainstorming and so forth, and there's some guidance around tools and philosophy of prototyping. Again, there's really no attention paid to the importance of establishing a foundation of design before you get into the details. This is another globally recognized thought leader in the interaction design and experience design space, the Interaction Design Foundation. And here, this model talks about tests to create new ideas and about prototypes sparking a new idea. I feel like we're trivializing what has to happen in this design space. And I don't think it does us a service, and I don't think it does a service to our clients. Now, as I'm talking to you, I know I'm preaching to the converted in this conversation, and it's really about a call to action, that it sort of behooves us to be a bit more deliberate in defining what it is that actually has to happen to get this right. This is the Nielsen-Norman model, another globally respected organization in the user experience space. And here, the guidance for ideation is to generate a range of crazy creative ideas. And then in the prototyping, we build real tactile representation for a range of ideas. So again, I worry that this is a bit misleading and not respecting the rigor of the design process. Imagine urban planners. If that was their brief, we just need you to create a range of crazy creative ideas for this city. There'll probably be a great range of circuses and symphonies, but are we going to really identify the structure of the city that is going to be able to support the key use cases? This is the roller coaster model based on IDEO, different model, same conclusion. And another model looking at kind of how we integrate agile and experience design in this lean UX model. And again, there's no specific guidance here. So I think I can effectively describe that every one of these models doesn't differentiate between a foundational level of design. As a result, what are we doing? We're doing what feels right, what's worked in the past. We go where our skills, knowledge, and our talents inspire us. And in the spirit of rapid deployment and sprint-based execution, we're often accommodating the push for delivery and sacrificing the importance of stopping and creating this design foundation. Now, I've referred to this as high-level design. That's kind of how it's broadly described. We think of it in other terms as well: conceptual design, experience architecture. At Blink, we refer to this as a North Star design or a design vision. Whatever you call it, this is a call to action that we need to pay more attention to it. Now, why? Why is it important? So reiterating, we're in a world of delivering software products and platforms in increments. Incremental functionality is released to provide incremental value. And in that world, change is a necessity. We are designing change, and therefore we need to design for change. And I propose that the way to design for change, to ensure that it's graceful change rather than disruptive change, is to start with a North Star design. So we have this overall goal of this North Star design to create the conditions where you're minimizing the impact of change, at least the negative impact, on all of our stakeholders. Now, let's start with just our colleagues, our business and product owners, the development team, and the design team. For us to be able to manage change and minimize churn, we would like to have a stable and robust platform and a foundation as makes sense. to the extent that we're able to project into the future and understand the usage of the platform and the product. Now let's go, of course, to the most important player in the game here, which is the end users. We talk about the psychology of change aversion. And we have to recognize that people aren't necessarily averse to change. They're averse to disruption, and disruption that they don't understand the value of. And so here's where, again, I feel the importance of the foundational design in the robustness and minimizing disruption. Jared Spool of User Interface Engineering has a great term for this from the user perspective. He refers to it as embraceable change. He's got a great article up on his site I encourage you to read. So to summarize, this purpose of the North Star design is to minimize the impact of change on all stakeholders. Now, a design that has the following attributes, or as I say, a North Star design that are foundational or high-level design, has to have the following attributes in my mind to do a good job of this. One is scalability. So we need to anticipate into the future, and so that our architecture doesn't get disrupted. And this is, of course, what our technical architects are doing as well, right? They're looking at various aspects of the technology stack, from data management and application management and all the integrations and various other aspects of the platform from a technology perspective. These are not decisions that are being made as functionality is being released during our sprints. These are decisions that are being made prior to or up to sprint 0. And we need to be doing the same thing. Optimization is another key here. So all of the guidance that we've seen so far is about kind of coming up with a bunch of crazy ideas and then trying some out, picking the ones that, based on our experience, we think are most promising. We'll try them out and we'll get some feedback. So I'm going to make an analogy, and I don't want to make this disparaging, but really it reminds me of the infinite monkey theorem. And that is when theoretical mathematicians postulated that given enough time, 1,000 monkeys on typewriters could reproduce the entire works of William Shakespeare. So again, it's a bit of an extreme analogy, but the point is what we're saying our process needs to be is to come up with some great ideas, throw them at the wall and see which ones stick. And that's the kind of the iterative user feedback that we'll get on it. And I'm proposing we never have enough time. Obviously, the monkeys might have infinite time, but we are always under time constraints. And within those time constraints, we need to choose our areas of focus very wisely. And so not only am I saying we need to focus on those aspects of the high-level design that ensure scalability and graceful change, but we also need to not sweat the details. We need to know what it is that we can defer until later. The last point here is that we end up getting early buy-in so that, again, we avoid the churn of introducing something structural or really foundational that ends up disrupting our own internal development process. Okay, so I've talked about why I think it's important and how it is not so well represented right now. So the question is, where does this happen and what does it include? So I believe we need to modify this 5-step process. First of all, we talk about test as a step at the end. And I think all of us have mature processes where we know we're not going to wait until the end to test. What we are going to do is we're going to be iterating and testing and revising as we move along. So that's one adjustment that I propose to this 5-step model. The next adjustment is that we're not prototyping per se. We are creating a North Star design or a high-level design. After the ideation and all of the opportunity for lateral thinking is floated through whoever is able to come up with creative ideas, then the design team needs to establish the foundations of the design. And that needs to happen prior to the detailed design. And here's how I then map this onto our agile process. Just like the technical design, this North Star design needs to happen in sprint 0, validated through end user feedback. This is how that model would appear in the double diamond. The approach would appear in the double diamond model. Okay, so I've talked about where it happens. Now, what is it? Now, this is not the right answer per se. This is what I have learned through my experience in my career are the most important facets to focus on to ensure that we have stability in the foundation of the design over the long term to minimize the impact, the negative impact of change. So let's start with interaction model. Now, all these are going to be familiar, so it's not that I'm sort of exposing new concepts. It's more about how we use them and how we promote them. But I'm going to just to be clear about what I'm thinking about these elements. So the interaction model, it addresses what's the nature of the solution. You know, what interaction style does it drive? Themes and metaphors. What sense and image does it convey? And this is foundational to setting expectations on the end user's part of how am I going to interact with this product or platform. Some examples here, and I'll pull out a couple as examples. So you can differentiate a traditional website, page-based website, as one interaction model from a portal website that has modules or portlets that have their own kind of behavior and can be placed in various locations, can be maximized to page level. These all set expectations for interaction, these models. An interview style that was popularized through TurboTax. And then there's kind of some of these metaphors that are coming up. The paper document which are word processing applications are still relying on for good reasons. Again, it's another interaction model. In a sovereign application like a word processing document or the spreadsheet that you see above it, we have a model of interacting with actions that are through ribbons and menus, as opposed to when we're navigating through a website where you don't typically see those things, and you don't typically see a lot of links in our application models. And browsing shelves, we're still in Blockbuster, browsing shelves on almost every streaming video service that I have seen. I'm looking forward to an evolution from that. However, again, it sets an expectation, people understand it. Okay, so I've said enough about the interaction model. The second element here is the high-level information architecture. So again, we've moved from a point where we have these very large static pages of brochureware online, and we're executing hierarchical representations of every one of these pages down to the small branches and fine leaves. The point of that needs to be focused on here is the high-level structure, and this can apply to any one of those interaction models with different representations, but it's just about the high level. It's about the primary organizing concepts for how to interact with the content and functionality in the platform. It's about supporting navigation mechanisms that enable that interaction. This is right out of the Polar Bear series from Lou Rosenfeld and Peter Morville on information architecture for the World Wide Web. This is the high-level blueprint. Again, this isn't getting down to all the tiny leaves and branches. This is just establishing the concepts that ensure that we're able to understand and interact with the content and functionality of the solution. Here's an example, and this is just small excerpts from quite a large representation of the information architecture that we at Blink did in the consolidation of over 3,000 web assets from NASA into a sort of single unified experience. Again, decisions made. Each of these types of menus have conceptual purpose, and so those need to be conceptualized and then design, navigation mechanisms designed to achieve those. All right, so interaction model and high-level IA. Now global components come into play here. So these are now the landmarks of your solution. They help you stay oriented. They set expectations for their usage, and they simply ensure a level of consistency so that you are able to, again, thinking about all of the functionality that you're able to envision for your product or platform, you're using these tools to ensure that you have the flexibility and the extensibility that you will need as far as you can anticipate. Some examples of these: window management, window handling, panels, overlays, secondary windows, etc. I'll just call out as an example here of a global, maybe not a non-conventional global utility element here, which is this third one, the site-wide filter. In this particular case, for a website that was prominently informational, the user could self-identify and get a specific view and perspective on the content. And this is a utility pervasively that follows you around the site. Messaging architecture, I mentioned again, is kind of one of those components that's important. These are just examples, of course. There may be others that are more suitable to your applications. Then we focus on key design patterns. And here's where we start to blur the lines a little bit with detailed design, because for certain aspects of your design that address the moments that matter, you need to really figure out whether this stuff is going to deliver against the value that users are expecting. At Blink, we refer to these as signature experiences. These are the elements of your solution that make your solution unique and effective and stand out. So they form the core of your interactive concept, and if we don't get that right up front, then again, we're going to have problems as we start to evolve. Here's an example in an application, a travel application, Kayak, and I've highlighted a couple of areas here where design patterns have to be thought of and established. This is maybe a little bit rudimentary because of the fact that it doesn't necessarily change and have the level of sophistication. However, they're seeding a search and they're seeing search results. Certain aspects of attributes of each of those parts of the use case need to be designed in a way which are effective. So these are so core to the essence of this application that we need to get those things right. And then you can layer on top of that, well, then we need to sort, we need to filter, and how are we going to present those aspects? Again, you can start sweating the details later in terms of which are the primary filters, which are the secondary filters, what's the sequence of sort and so forth. Those are things that can happen. But in terms of establishing this framework, these are key. Here's another example of key design patterns. This is actually for a client who's focused on creating training and simulation and then real tools to manage disasters. And this is a simulation of a disaster response for a hurricane. And this is an overview, essentially a dashboard that at a glance provides a sense of status across a bunch of different jurisdictions. A signature pattern that we felt was so foundational to the effectiveness of the design. We wanted to look at this one early. Okay, those are the four elements. The last one here is the primary layouts. And again, this is bread and butter for our design discipline, establishing form factors, the layouts of the primary pages, templates and views, responsive behaviors, and you know, we've seen this and we use this. We establish grids, we establish layouts on top of those grids. Here's an example from e-commerce, facets on the left, for example, and primary, you've got hero images and you know, other aspects of your listings in this case. So together, what we've got are 5 elements of a North Star design. And my appeal to this design community is, A, ensure the project plan includes a high-level design phase or a North Star design phase. Get into your plans, make sure everybody understands why it's there. Get these things that we've talked about right first, get your buy-in, and then it's time to start sprinting. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. One thing that came up in there, and I love the concept, and it kind of, as you made the parallel that like there's an architecture kind of equivalent taking place for the technical side. One thing I've seen is that people are pushing back against that architecture on the technical side because there's the risk that you're going to over-engineer the solution. So what advice do you give to people that if they argue for and they win and they get this kind of phase into their projects, how do you ensure that they don't fall into that trap of over-engineering? So
I'm going to sort of interpret over-engineering from 2 perspectives. One is that you're actually generating a solution which is going to exceed the boundaries of what's actually needed or to provide value for your end users. So we've established our priorities in the problem space, and then we've kind of said, yeah, hey, but we've got all this ability to go beyond that. And to me, that's over engineering. The other aspect might be that we're not in sync with the technical platform or the technology platform. So there's a misalignment there. And then to that end, I'd say just the same way that we play with our technology and development peers in the sprint releases, we should be playing in the same sandbox. And in an ideal world, we have the opportunity, in fact, to establish the underpinnings of the experience design and the architecture well before we've finished making the decisions about our technology stack.
Great. Yeah, so that's a great point. More collaboration, and yeah, hopefully that will be able to solve the problem. So yeah, I do think it's a good point that there are two, if not even the third one, that we might making assumptions that the customers want something when it's not in fact true. But I'd love to keep asking you lots of questions because I have loads, but and if anybody does, we can share them in the Slack channel and we'll ask Paul to answer them there. But unfortunately, we're out of time for Paul's session. But thank you very much, Paul.
Absolutely, thank you. We appreciate everybody's attention.
So up next, we have Zikry, who will be talking about good design is never done. And
everyone.
Welcome, Robert. So thank you for joining us, and yeah, I'll hand over to you. Best of luck.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Rory, I really appreciate it. So our talk today is design is never done, which is product design in product company where the process is never iterative mindset from a project to some kind of process. As product ourselves dealing with processes.
Hi, Robert. Sorry to jump in.
Diamond also.
Sorry, Robert. The connection just seems to be jumping in and out. It's showing me that you've got no connection at the moment. I'm not sure if you can hear me. So it looks like we might have lost Robert. We'll just give him a few seconds. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin. Apologies for the technical issues. What we might do, we'll give Robert another few seconds to rejoin, but we might keep switching around our presenters for the evening. And I can see Matthew nodding his head there backstage. So we might, if yeah, I've not seen Robert at all at the moment. So what we might do is we might switch it around and introduce Matthew, who is going to be talking about what happens when our design job evolves. So welcome, Matthew. And apologies to everybody about the confusion and the movement around.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rory. I'm happy to go ahead if you...
Yeah, if you want to share your screen, then we can get started.
Go ahead and do that. Sorry, just busy. Let me know when my slideshow is showing.
Great, ready to go. So over to you, Matthew.
Great, thanks so much, Rory. So I want to have a chat today about what happens as your design job evolves. And it's something that's come up in the work that I've been doing, consulting to organizations on how to implement design, particularly around design capability build. And what we've seen is a trend in the last couple of years where organizations are promoting designers to more and more strategic roles. And coming from the design background, landing in these strategic positions, designers are having to navigate a whole new set of responsibilities and also figure out how their natural skills and natural talents work in as you move further and further away from the delivery of tangible design outputs. So hopefully this will help you guys as you figure out what to do next and what gets asked of you. The reason this is becoming key is we are seeing a lot more design professionals finding themselves in the C-suite of big organizations. These fields such as Chief Digital Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, there's other organizations, Chief Product Officer, that sort of thing. Traditionally, they were coming from other fields. They were coming from marketing or product or innovation, often from a technology background. More and more, we're seeing designers end up in these roles. And this is because there is a global drive towards a more customer-centric outlook. And as a result, designers are being seen as the right kind of people to navigate organizations' move towards putting the customers at the center of what they do. The big challenge that we face when we get into these roles is how do we use our unique skills and the strengths from the design community in a more strategic setting? So as design careers grow, it gets harder to define what we do. I think all designers have this problem. We've all got at least one relative who has no idea when we try to explain what we do. You know, they, especially older relatives whose jobs were kind of working in mines or harvesting peat or whatever it is. When you try to explain to them that you design an experience, it can be quite difficult. As your career becomes even more strategic and less tangible in terms of output, we get asked what we do, and we kind of make this face. Sort of, I'm not even going to try to explain it to you, Aunt Maud. It's not going to work in your world. So, and that becomes even more difficult because when you end up in these strategic roles and you start to ask yourself, what is expected from me now that I'm here? Then you even look at yourself and you make this face and kind of, I actually don't know why I'm here. Everybody here is so formal and grown up and they talk about numbers and accounts and retention. And I really just want to talk about why we're not having good experiences at the front end. And that kind of questioning is crucial, actually. And it's really important that we recognize what we bring to the table as design professionals when we're in this setting. Because at its core, at our heart, what we are, who we are really, is problem solvers as design professionals. And it's a very human thing. Innovation is driven by problem solving. We didn't start building houses because we like architecture. We built houses because we wanted to stay dry and safe and warm. And that evolved and created a whole load of other experiences. Similarly, all great human progression has come from a need, a solving of a problem, a challenge that needed to be overcome. And as designers and people who've worked in these in our various organizations, that's what we've always tried to do. And this gives us a unique set of skills that we can take into the boardroom when we start making strategic decisions and we start getting asked for input on big questions from organizations that we work for. We can look at it from a problem-solving perspective in a way that's not driven and not predetermined by a product perspective or, you know, the other technological constraints that some of our colleagues who come from different backgrounds bring to the table. And obviously that problem solving, it does make us look a little bit like superheroes, which we should all be very proud of. I wouldn't advocate wearing a cape to work, but if you think you could rock it, then please go ahead. There's also an important thing to recognize here that there is a time for new voices in business strategy. And the reason this is key is crucial. The time is now, the time is right. Because the world has changed, perspectives have changed. And also, traditionally, it was these guys who made all of the decisions. And they gave us some great things. They gave us climate change, the global financial crisis, my pet peeve, middle managers writing segues in open plan offices, and of course, toxic masculinity and culture of abuse and bullying in the workplace. So their greatest are not so great. And it's time for other perspectives to be brought into strategic decision-making in organizations, and designers have that ability to look at things differently. And you guys as designers and as design professionals who've spent your careers solving problems and getting close to customers and understanding user ecosystems and going through the design processes that Paul just spoke about are uniquely placed to help organizations make strategic decisions and plans for the future around the correct kind of priorities, and hopefully avoid the evils of the office segue. And so it is time for something new. And with that, that's why I want to say, as you move into these roles, as your roles become more strategic and you find yourself moving further and further away from producing screens and deliverables and being part of that process, Embrace the strengths that you bring. Don't try to evolve and become the haha business guy. Still be a designer, still be true to your skills, stay a problem solver, stay focused on customer value. And that is how you can add incredible value in the strategic space. There's certain things that we bring as design professionals that can be massively refreshing in the strategic space, and also can provide a lot of additional thought and questioning for the guys who are making those decisions. One of those that designers have is that big picture thinking. When we solve a problem, whenever we've designed a solution, we start at the beginning. We start with the questions of, what is the ecosystem? How are people doing this now? How are they solving it already? Recognizing that for the most part, 99% of the things we ever create are already being solved. Banking apps didn't invent banking. Airplanes didn't invent travel. People were already doing these things, and our innovation comes from solving them better, faster, cheaper, whatever it is. And that big picture is crucial. You don't want to have your strategic decisions being made in a kind of inside of a silo where everybody just repeats what they hear inside. You want to bring that big picture and say, this is what's happening in the outside world. This is what our customers are engaging with. This is how their attitudes are changing. Good example we can all see, that we can kind of all of us refer to and can relate to. Before Netflix, we were all quite happy to wait 7 days to watch the next episode of a TV show. To the younger people watching this, that may seem absolutely insane, but for most of my life, a TV show aired on 1 day a week, and then you waited 7 more days and then watched the next one. And if you missed it, you missed it. Obviously today, that is completely unacceptable. No one waits 7 days for anything. If I want a TV show, I will watch it all in 11 straight hours, foregoing eating and sleeping and washing and spending time with my family in order to every little nugget of that TV show in one go. And that big picture had to, the fact that people started binging and watching had a whole load of other areas. Traditional TV, the way that content is delivered across any number of platforms now, we've all come to accept this binging culture as a standard norm when it comes to video content. And if you didn't take a step back and look at that big picture and understand how are the mental models around content, you'd have a very hard time forming strategy for these organizations who deliver content on a big scale. Empathy is another huge one for that designers and design professionals can bring into strategic boardrooms. I used an oil rig for this one because no one does adverts about the environment better than oil companies. We've all seen them. They make it look like all they do all day is plant trees and play with kids in parks. The truth is that that's not real empathy. That's people putting a sticker on something and saying that they are empathetic. And I think it's really important that we recognize that true empathy looks very different. True empathy is getting close to a customer's world, understanding their ecosystem, understanding why they can't do the thing that you want them to do. What are their blockers? What are their barriers? And how does this impact their life in a meaningful way? As designers, we've spent our career building our empathy skills. We've gotten used to understanding how different people use services differently. And it's second nature to us to understand that what works for me won't necessarily work for 17 other users. And bringing that into a strategic space where we start from understanding who our customers are and where they are can add immense value to the sections of organizations who are expected to make big decisions that are going to be felt over the next 3 to 5 years. By enabling them and giving them the tools and insights about our customers and users, you can enable them to make far more meaningful decisions and hopefully increase the engagement that they'll have with their customers over time. And finally, navigating the abstract. The image here, as you can see, it's from a very, very old map. The phrase on there means, "Here be dragons." I like it because the legend is that when people made maps back in the old days, navigators would go off to some new place and they'd have to wander around measuring things and writing maps. If they didn't have time to explore a certain space, they would just write, "Here be dragons." And that just meant that they didn't know what was there. And I think that's a pretty good answer for some of what happens in corporates where they don't have time to gather all the facts. So they just kind of assume there's dragons over there. We're going to deal with that later. Somebody else will come along and figure it out. And it becomes a difficult navigation question. As designers, we're used to navigating the abstract. We're often given tasks that are abstract at the beginning and we're expected to turn them into something concrete. We've all had situations where you're in a team and they'll say, "We need this feature. We need whatever it is. We need a rapid onboarding. We need onboarding in 5 minutes or whatever. And sure, that's a great thing, but you can't build that. You can't just say, we'll build onboarding in 5 minutes. There's a whole load of things you have to do to make that concrete, whilst not losing the core goal, the objective, what do we want to do at the beginning. Go back to the Netflix analogy. Let's make it so people can binge watch content. Let's do it. Let's make ourselves a binging platform. But that's an abstract output. Ultimately, to know what that looks like, you've got to sit down and spend time figuring out, how do I make sure that this is actually what the people, what users want, and what they'll resonate with, and what they'll use and be comfortable with. So we're used to that, and taking that into a strategic setting where the objectives are very abstract. We need to increase retention. We need to improve our position in the market. We need to ensure that we're number one in people's minds when they think of instant mattresses or whatever the business model you're forced to deal with is. That's quite an abstract objective, and understanding what that means is something that we can bring to the table, where we say, sure, we want to be number one in the instant mattress game, but let's first understand, what do instant mattresses even mean to people? What are they sleeping on now when they don't have a mattress? How are they solving their instant sleep needs? And you build all of that and navigate it to, actually, it's not about the instant mattress, it's about the comfort of the pillow. Let's use that as the starting point, and therefore build towards really good pillows, and the instant mattress becomes a secondary kind of thing. I don't think that is a real business model. If you're writing stuff down, that's probably not something you should invest money in. But as an example, I feel it kind of works. So navigating the abstract is one of your strengths that you're going to take into that thing. And obviously, what I've just done is tell you a load of abstract stuff. So to help it kind of make it more real, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what you can actually do, and specific activities and interventions you can make as a design professional. So on the first, kind of one of the most important things you'll do as someone in a strategic setting is to bring strategic input from a design perspective. So you're going to have the same conversations you were having at the delivery level, but you're going to start having it at a more meaningful and kind of leveragey position. So you're going to be the voice of the customer the same way you've always been, but now you're going to do it with at the strategic level, and talk to your C-suite members about what customers really need. And that means also having the opportunity to create processes that bring these insights into the room when decisions are made. You can force your team to start with the why. Why are we doing this? Why do our customers need it or want it? And why should our teams care about it? That why is crucial. Very often we find organizations are continuing to do the same things that they've always done, or they're making the same kind of decisions. They have a formula. We did this next year we're going to do that plus 15%. And they keep doing that without ever tracking back to, why are we doing it? And if you don't understand why, you can't make it meaningful for your customers, and eventually they will disengage. And that's your role as the creative, the design perspective in the strategic space. You're the one who's going to push that why. You can also start to ask, what is our place in the broader ecosystem of our customers? Who's already doing this, and can we improve it? And by bringing that perspective into the discussion, you're providing another avenue of that big picture, where the decision makers, and you as one of the decision makers, can start to examine where you exist as an organization within the broader ecosystem. How do people see you and engage with you? How do they solve the problems that you're having now? And that input is something you're already doing now. And that's why I said you don't want to change who you are. You're not going to evolve and become business guy. You're still going to be who you are, but you're going to start having these conversations and forcing people who haven't necessarily engaged with it at a meaningful level to start doing so. Second, at a secondary level, you want to create a design-led delivery model. So you want to build structures and processes that enable value delivery. Paul spoke about a couple of different models that exist, things that organizations are using. And I think I agree with him completely that all of these models, they do create a lot of confusion at times. But also what's important is that you, as the leader in that space, have to recognize that you'll need to panel beat certain processes without losing their core value. So implement design thinking, but do it in a way that's authentic, so that you still go through the correct steps. You still build empathy. You still do your definition. You still prototype properly. And it's completely true about prototyping. Prototyping isn't a step. It's a tool that exists along all of the steps. It enables other steps. It enables testing. It enables insights. It enables experimentation. And you've got to build those processes. Make sure that they fit within your organization. Every organization is different. The way the teams are structured, the way your technology stack is either impervious to change or far more agile. And you've got to build your processes around that. And you've got to be the champion of that. You've got to create an environment that encourages experimentation. You've got to embrace learning from failure and link the outcomes that you create to true human needs. I think that's one of the most important things, to kind of early on define the objectives from a customer perspective. Understand what the customer is trying to do, not what product we're trying to sell them. An example we've used in previous conversations around this is to say that nobody ever wants a home loan or mortgage, depending what you call it where you are. No one wants one of those. We all just want a new house, and the mortgage and the home loan become a means to an end. No one wakes up in the morning saying, what I really want to do today is get into a 30-year relationship with a bank. But we have to deliver that. And people recognize they need it, but they'd much rather focus on the home, the moving. So if you build a process that recognizes that the real need, the real journey here is one of moving into a new home, and that the enabler is simply the product, the lending product, you can have a far more meaningful conversation with your customers. And I think that that's what you want to do, is be able to show your organization how to link the outcomes that they're building towards back to the human need that they're solving for. And with all of that in mind, it's your role as the design leader to build toolkits that are based on that design thinking methodology. They're bespoke to your organization, and they allow innovation to flourish. And I think that's a really important role to play, to kind of advocate for that and be the voice of change. The last thing that's often overlooked in organizations, because we are, all of us, very, very busy at the moment, and I think it's almost an overhang for the last couple of years, we've all moved into this rapid kind of, we've just got to get stuff done mode. Everybody's so kind of, things have changed, everybody's gone digital, everything's new, everything's open for the taking. And as a result, we're just running ahead with new features, we're delivering new things. And very few organizations are taking the time to effectively measure and promote excellence. So you've got to be that champion of good design, ethical engagement, and honest value creation. You've got to look for the opportunities to showcase the hard work of your design team through awards, industry events, and knowledge sharing events like this, for example. And you've also got to set the principles of delivery and build mechanisms to measure them, report back, learn, and grow. So are we delivering against the value that we've set for ourselves? Not are we selling products, but are we actually solving a human problem? Is that measured effectively? Are people happy with the way that we do it? Or are they doing it because they have to? And that's an important difference, because if they're just doing your product because they have to, as soon as something easier comes along, they'll leave instantly. But if you're solving their human need, if you're solving their problem, they're far more likely to stay with you when a new mechanism comes along. And I think that's the key thing here. If you don't set that principle of delivery and don't measure against it effectively, you're going to find it far more difficult to evolve later, because you won't know why your customers are dropping off. Whereas if you've already measured it properly and you understand the need that was informing their engagement with you, you'll find it a lot easier to evolve with your customers, because you'll know where they are and you'll have inserted mechanisms to track them and learn from them and be with them on that journey. So when something new comes along and they realize they don't need the home loan anymore, we're able to, whatever it is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Realistically, we're probably going to go backwards, and you're going to end up buying assets with cows or bartering it with goat's milk. And then once they start doing that, we want to be the ones who manage the goat milk market. So but if you're not there with your customer, then you'll find it very difficult to know that they are doing that. So that was, for me, a very brief overview of what design careers look like as they evolve. And I hope it helps some people. I'm happy to obviously take questions and talk about it some more. But the key thing is never stop being the designer, the problem solver, and never overlook the strengths that you bring to the table as you move away from delivery and more towards strategy and planning in your career. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthew. That was really interesting, kind of just a different take on where things can go. And we've actually got a question come in from the audience from Camohello. And he said, thanks for sharing, Matt. Very informative and inspiring. What are the strategic post-delivery activities we should implement in order to avoid our solutions becoming legacy solutions no one ever touches again?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, thanks for the question. I think one of the key things, I think it's twofold. So I think before you even start, you have to have gotten close to understanding what's the real problem we're solving. What is this solution going to be doing in the customer's lives? And then use that as defining your measures later. So you need to identify what the value drivers are, the blockers, the pain points you're attempting to overcome. Then post-delivery and even during development, you should be measuring against those to say, are we hitting the high notes in the customer's mental models? And revisiting that. I think one of the challenges we have in a lot of organizations is that we're pushed so fast to the next feature, the next delivery, the next iteration, that we don't often take enough time to measure what we just did. and whether or not it still holds relevance for our customers' mental models and for the problem we had set out to solve in the beginning. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that resonates with me, and that actually touches on, and I hope actually I probably haven't pronounced your name properly, Camohello. Apologies for that, but if you do want to ask a follow-up, just put there, and I'll put the question to Matthew. But one thing you touched on there I thought was really interesting when you said that, and this is what I feel a lot happens, you're being pushed to the next feature. So when you were kind of talking, like, it's good to, like, I was equating it to the jobs to be done. People don't want the drill, they want the hole in the wall. What about when you are being squeezed? How, as a designer, can you try to take charge to evolve your role yourself when you are being squeezed and you want to spend more time doing that more strategic work, but you're being caught in the kind of tactical day-to-day?
Yeah, it's something that happens a lot, and the teams that I've worked with, we've seen it in different spaces. And the thing is that evolution actually takes quite a lot of time, because very often, and I think it goes again to, you can use design thinking to kind of unpack it with the team you're working with. Very often that push is coming from the product owners, the solution owners, and the delivery leads, who are under pressure for whatever reason. They need to move the needle, and they've identified that this thing will do that. So you've kind of got to, in the early days, you play a bit of compromise where you kind of say, I'm going to do this as you've asked it for now, but I want us to have a more meaningful discussion about, don't just tell me the feature you want, tell me the problem you want to solve, and let's go through a process where we solve a problem, and don't just deliver a feature. Don't tell me you want a big red button, tell me what the button needs to do, and let's talk about how we can better solve that, because maybe it doesn't need to be a button at all. Maybe it can be something else that does what a button does.
Yeah. Again, I think you might be singing to the converted or preaching to the choir.
Definitely.
But touching on that, like, because coming back to your first point was about making the language and kind of understanding business and getting into those conversations. I've seen where people have tried, but they've been kind of, this is your box, you go and do the designs, we've come up with the ideas, now stop asking these annoying questions. Yeah,
and something that I've seen work in some spaces is the designers kind of taking it on themselves to solve two things, to kind of almost internally A/B test, where they do what they're asked to do, and then separately they go through a design process that comes up with a different solution, and then present both back to kind of say to their teams, I did what you asked for and it looks like this, but I had a thought that we could go through the journey differently and it looks like this. A lot more organizations are open to actually A/B testing in the real world these days, which is fantastic. I think having the opportunity to do that is really good. But even doing it through your normal design processes, prototyping and user testing a concept, you can usually get buy-in for at least that. As long as you can make the case that you're only wasting your own time if it goes wrong, a lot of organizations will let you do that. And I think it's about showcasing, almost you need to move away from arguing about the solution itself, because ultimately that we've got to be agnostic and fluid around what it is that gets delivered, but rather focusing, getting your team to start talking more meaningfully about the customer and the customer problem. And that starts with having kind of almost being slightly annoying at the beginning of the day to kind of say, is this what our customer wants? Producing the personas, making sure that they're backed by data, so that you can show your team, this isn't going to work in the ecosystem of the customer that we agreed we're building for. This doesn't sit well with them. This doesn't compare to the competitors that we know that they're using. And having those conversations and pushing back until they kind of give you the space to explore solutions from a more customer-centric perspective.
Excellent. Some great advice there. Hopefully people can use that. And Kamala said that the great answer. So thanks again. So obviously you answered their question correctly. I think that brings us to pretty much time. So thank you very much, Matthew. Really enjoyed that talk, and I hope everybody out there enjoyed it too. So
thanks so much.
Great. Now we're going to welcome back Robert Zikry, who will be talking about good design is never done. So apologies for the previous technical issues, but hopefully those are behind us now. So welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Rory. I really hope it works now. Second time is hopefully a charm. All right, so For our talk today, it's about how the iterative design happens in large organizations, in product companies and tech companies, and how good design is never done. As products and UX designer, we have often find ourselves dealing with a lot of concepts in the process that we are producing those designs. So the double diamond, the job to be done, theory, the continuous discovery, definition of done, product market fit, feedback loops, and many, many more other concepts that are necessarily relevant to how we produce product that's relevant for our customers. But on the surface, it doesn't really look like it's related to the specific design process or the craft of design. Hopefully, by the end of this talk, if everything goes well and if my internet holds up, we are going to clarify how those worlds actually belong to each other, the continuous discovery, continuous delivery, continuous design, and the mindset behind that iterative design process when we are shipping software. But first, let's start with a quick story, which is in Canada, near where Paul was telling his story earlier. It's a story about Quebec Bridge, which is at the turn of the last century in 1903 was meant to be the longest cantilever bridge span in the world, which is a huge engineering marvel and a project that was aiming to break records. As you can see, this middle span is 1,800 feet long, which is almost 550 meters long, which is nothing that was heard of before. And in 1903, as the work has been progressing and the bridge was taking shape, people were going through all the plans, and the engineers and the workers and everyone was working hard on building that project and that bridge. However, knowing how complex this bridge design was, unfortunately, a lot of those design and engineering and structural calculations was never double-checked or properly checked within that completion for the design. And that has created a massive risk on the whole project. What we know today is those initial designs, the bridge's own weight was far too heavy for carrying that capacity. And as you can imagine, in summer 1907, disaster struck. And near the end of that day's shift, after 86 workers working hard on that project, 75 people lost their lives, unfortunately, and the rest was injured. And it was such a world disaster by any measure. And after inquiries and investigations, they understood that the real problem was those measurements, those design wasn't adding up, and they fixed that. And they commenced the work in the year after. And unfortunately, for the second time, within the less than 10 years, another disaster struck, and the middle span, the central span of the bridge, fell again, killing 13 workers, fell in the river. And knowing what we know today, those designs were risky, and the engineers and the chief engineer in specific, his name was Theodore Cooper, was responsible for that disaster because he took it lightly. He didn't go through the details. He didn't look to the designs, look at those calculations, and give it the respect that it deserved. And to commemorate this kind of disaster and make sure that everyone is thinking about the responsibility they have in their hands, a popular story was within that collapsed bridge, steel and iron, all that was broken apart and reused to create iron rings. Right now, I think many Canadians in the call might relate to this ring, that it's being worn by all graduates from Canadian Engineering School to respect that not only the death and the disaster that has happened building that bridge, but also to make sure that it's a good reminder for people to check their designs, check their calculations, double check once and twice and thrice. And a symbol and a reminder for those ethics associated with the profession. Thankfully, our design discipline at the moment in tech doesn't require a lot of risk or deal with that kind of life-saving risk, but except, of course, if you are designing software for airplanes or something that can cost people lives. But not only bridges and design, where designers and engineers have only one chance to do it right the first time around. If you can see all the design disciplines at the moment, they tend to get it right the first time. Even though there is no lives at risk, almost all forms of design can do anything about their creation once it's been shipped, once it's been done. Design as a discipline has always had a done state, from print, from industrial design, interior design, product design, architecture, and fashion. And that residue of a state of done, or for example, if you went a decade ago when you see Photoshop files or sketch files having final underscore V1, final underscore final underscore V2, there is always this final state in design, and that residue was actually coming from that background. And designers and product team have necessarily for that disciplines have to wait for the next year cycle where they can do anything about their creation, leaving the customers with outdated designs from last year. So the thing with design right now is in any form of design or problem solving, it's always a function of how flexible that medium is. So the less flexible or malleable that medium is, the more difficult it is to see product being iterated on. And sometimes we're designing for atoms like bridges or architecture or a mug or a chair. But some other times, which we currently are facing in software industry, we're designing for electrons, for bits. And the beauty about that is we're designing for software. It's in the name, it's malleable. Software design is flexible in nature. And we have to embrace that flexibility because that's the medium that we're dealing with. So how do we approach iterative design? A quick walk down the memory lane. If you can remember a couple of decades ago with the classic waterfall model, we had the define and the speccing and the design and the requirements. It would take a few months to do. And then the engineers will go off for a few quarters with that handover. Very little collaboration. They might be sitting in different departments, different buildings, maybe different countries, and then they ship at the end of the year, big deployment, big bang, hit or miss, very little, couple of decades ago, very little impact measurement. So it's usually hit or miss. And then they start over the next year, working on the next version. And usually they will ship the software in something that looks like this, in a software CD. And the CD itself was the product rather than the software on it. So you will see the business talking about the impact that they have sold X amount of CDs rather than what kind of behavior we have changed through that software that we shipped or what kind of problems we have solved. It was very difficult to measure the impact. But about a decade ago, we started to see the humanization of our design process and how now people are embracing the discovery and the research process and prototyping and testing and iterating, which is basically trying to make sure that we don't leave any rock unturned. We validate every assumption, but it's still biased toward getting it right the first time. Very big investment at the beginning before handing things over to our engineering teams, and eventually they ship, hit or miss, they iterate. But that whole industrial-like assembly line was getting a little bit as a blocker for product teams because software industry was not meant to be that rigid. It was meant to be iterative. And software engineers were actually the ones that wanted to ship faster, and that's why they invented or came up with the Agile manifesto a couple of decades ago. Along came the double diamond process, which, as Paul mentioned, it's a very solid process. It's actually very good design process, but it's sometimes, if not used well, it's quite linear. As you can see, you go diversion, conversion, diversion, conversion on problems and solutions. And sometimes if we follow the process as rigid as we can, we might end up being lost in the process rather than the outcome of that process. So the outcome is to define the right problems and solve those problems using the best solutions. So the idea of coming up with best solutions require iterations. And for the double alignment process, people who are embracing it, it suggests that for every act of definition, there is act of execution. But sometimes when you define a problem, sometimes problems don't really need to be solved, or some solutions don't really need to be pursued. So it's not clear if we came up with a solution that doesn't work, where do we iterate? Do we go all the way from the back, like start all over, explore more problems, or do we go to the next best solution in the list? So you would usually find designers iterating on their designs, keep shipping more designs, coming up with multiple variations of that design, or coming up with concepts, testing it with customers without actually shipping anything. And when it's coupled with agile delivery process, you will see a big chunk of discovery and definition and user testing and development on those solutions done upfront, and then almost like a waterfall handover going to the engineering teams where they want to go for an MVP. They ship an MVP, they slice it, they fix it, they ship another slice, they refactor that MVP only to find that they need to pivot, or there is a completely different opportunity in the market, and the product that they have really discovered well and they coded well no longer fits the need or fits the market, which is not really an iterative approach, but rather a big bang discovery and a big bang delivery, but just being incrementally shipped. So Jason Fried, the founder and CEO of 37 Signals and Basecamp, has said it really well. You can only iterate on something after it's been released. Prior to release, you're just making the thing. So even if you change it, you're just making it. Iterating is when you change or improve after it's out. So you want to iterate. If you want it, ship it. And for that to work, the end goal for us to ship faster, ship frequently, and have properly defined metrics of the problems that we're trying to solve so that we can iterate better. Good design is a function of time it takes us to ship. And that's why sometimes some companies over-index on code reusability, on design systems, on CI/CD, making sure that every part of the whole ecosystem works well together, not for the sake of quality only and making sure that we are shipping quality code and shipping reusable componentized designs, but also to make us ship faster, because the only way we can iterate on our solutions and figure out if they are working or not, if we ship faster. So how do we ship faster and more frequently? It starts by changing our mindset. We are no longer working in a linear process. It's iterative, it's continuous, and it starts with shipping. We are no longer working with the main idea behind we need to do the designs, we need to check it, double check it, back to the ring and back to building bridges. We no longer need that. It's not necessarily anymore in the software industry. We need to do just enough research on the riskiest assumptions and the most expensive and irreversible decisions, make sure that we get those right. We uncover the opportunities, we de-risk the mission that we are after, and we do just enough design and making sure that these designs, all designs are hypotheses, right? So it's informed guesses. We can never know if those designs work unless we ship it. So we ship those solutions, and it's not about shipping code, it's about shipping experiments. And we do just enough validation in reality, in actual code, and everything we ship is a test, an experiment that can be successful or unsuccessful. Which brings me to a very important point. Unsuccessful experiments are not failed experiments. Unsuccessful means that we believed that this thing will work, this solution will work, whatever it was, maybe change the label, change the button, change the screen, or completely revamped a section, and it was unsuccessful. But just the fact that we learned why it's not working and how we can make it better, and we have a very good idea where to go from here, it makes it a good experiment. Versus the failed experiment, which we learned nothing. We just shipped, we have no idea why it didn't work. Or worse, we have no idea why it worked. And that's actually dangerous, because if you ship something and you have no idea why it's working, you will be a very a big blocker for you to revamp it, because you are trying to keep it and uphold it, not to touch it because it's working, and we have no idea why it's working with our customers or why it's serving their needs. We do enough research on it, but we don't want to revamp it. So that's the difference between unsuccessful experiments and failed experiments, which Winston Churchill said it best when he said, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. We have our mission. We know exactly where we're heading. We will have bumps across the way. We know that designs inherently are going to be changed, and they are flexible, they are malleable, they are soft. So we're going to see failures across the way, but we're eventually going to get there. Which brings me to a very good case study from our team at talabat. You know, being in a big company that serves millions and millions of customers every single day, we know that our riders are at the heart of our delivery business across all the 9 countries that we serve in the MENA region. And each rider plays a pivotal role in delivering a seamless ordering experience to our customers. It's always a priority for us to look after them and to do everything that we can towards appreciating the rider efforts. We actually call them internally our heroes. And many of our users have expressed a desire to show their gratitude to the hard work that the riders do. Sometimes they don't have cash when they're opening the door to give them tips. So the first thing that we did a couple of years ago was to introduce rider tipping design component in order tracking. When after you placed your order, you are looking at the screen, you are waiting for your driver to come, so you just tip the rider. And at that time, we have seen that not a lot of people using this widget. So in fact, it was 0.3% of our orders being tipped. So 3 orders in every 1,000 orders being tipped, which is not a great impact if we want to appreciate our riders. So we decided to try a completely different bet. We said, how about we introduce this component, a better version of that component, but within the checkout flow, which a lot of people were a little bit skeptical, like how would you tip someone that you haven't seen the service for, you haven't received the food yet, why would you place that tip? And the only way for us, given the experimentation culture we have at talabat, and given the high ability to ship something, learn from it, and move on from it, we said, you know what, let's do it. It's a bet. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, we're going to iterate on it and see how it works. So we actually shipped it. And when we added in the checkout screen, to everybody's amazement, we almost 10x the impact. So we took that 0.3% of tipped order all the way to 4%. And kudos to the team, seeing that impact and seeing that improvement right there. And shortly after, we discovered that people want to put their own custom values. They want to introduce more than the amount that we suggest to them. So we decided to go on and introduced it. We even iterated on it a couple of times by keeping your tip, and that doubled the impact. It went from 4% to 8%. And this is when we knew that we are on a very big path for us to even improve this component even further for the sake of our riders. And so we came up with an idea, a very out there idea, like how about we introduce emojis? What will happen if we visualize to people what this amount is costing you, and how is it going to impact the rider's life? And that took the impact from 8% to 11%. And then we went all in with making it selected by default. And of course, it's very intuitive and clear for people to clear that tip if they want to, and if they clear it and honor that that option and that desire from them, and we 2x that impact. So the idea here was not only to be bold and to validate the assumption and to ship something and see the impact yourself, but also once you see that impact, don't stop there. Keep iterating and test out different ideas, even if you feel like they are out there. Eventually, good design is not one and done. Good design is a function of the number of iterations that we can ship. Iterating solutions is an absolute must to reaching great design. And successful design teams and successful product teams don't stop there. It's very proportional to the amount of experimentations that they run and learn from. That's why product teams should always look after a problem, and they should focus on it, working for months and quarters on end on that specific problem rather than a one and done kind of project. Which brings me to the next part about MVP design. How do we define MVPs? What's an MVP looking like? Because MVP is 0 to 1 rather than 1 to 100. Similar to the rider tipping example that I was talking, it's more on MVP on checkout, but 1 to 100 of improvement and evolution. I was looking for the best description of an MVP, and this one hit home with me with Alan Holub's description. Alan is, of course, the software engineering guru and an author and one of the godfathers of object-oriented programming and agile. He said that MVP is the minimum thing you can build that tests the viability of a product idea. So an MVP is a test. And if we approach it from that mindset, MVP is not a small scope of the project or the product that you're building, it's a test. So how do we scope those MVPs? Let's have a quick thought starter. Completely moving away from software. What's the MVP of a house? And let's take a second, think about an MVP of a house, which is a good thought starter, and I was actually doing it with my team. Some people would usually say, well, it might be a cabin, it might be a hut, a small shelter that's built with wood rather than extravagant building, which can be true. It's true. It's a good solution. Somebody else would say, well, we can have zero price paid for that house, and the MVP of a house can be a cave. You go there, you stay there, you haven't paid anything, and it can be a house, which is also true. Somebody else would say, well, it depends. If you're just needing a house to be protected from rain, then the MVP would be an umbrella, and that would be true. And one of the best answers from the team actually came from the product lead and partner that I work with. And she said to me, well, if your true purpose of a house is to hold value and to invest, then maybe stocks or crypto, not maybe in the current inflation terms, but maybe it's a good solution. So it can be just buying some stocks with that money rather than go to house if you want to invest, which can also be true. If you can see those four solutions, they are not the same thing. They are completely different. You have no idea where to start. The MVP of a house, I want to build a house, I want an MVP, and you have no idea where to go from here because there are different paths. However, going back a layer of abstraction, what does a house solve for our customers? If we've done just enough research and we found that the real need is not investment, it's not being protected from rain, it's being in a shelter, maybe from animals, maybe from the elements, maybe from snow. So with that said, after you are being clear and focused, you can clearly choose two winning ideas and two losing ideas. However, you can go a little bit deeper. Now that we know that our users need shelter, so what other solutions are out there for shelters? Someone would say, well, we can have a tent. Somebody else might say, well, an RV van would be a good idea as well, which is, as a camper van, it's a good shelter as well as a tent, but you're not sure also which one you should pursue. You can pay for building a house or a hut, or you can pay for that camper van or pay for the tent. But if if you are clear about your research and you've just done enough investigation, you can see maybe your customers need shelter on the move, which again would go through the authorization and killing of your darlings, killing of solutions that might have worked in the past. And you say, no, now that I know that people need shelter on the move, I'm no longer interested in building a house or going to a cave. Those two solutions can work. And you continue down that path of continuous discovery and continuous analysis and continuous measurement or comparison between solutions. And you come up with more ideas. Maybe now that we know it's a shelter on the move, and we investigated a little bit more, that is for campers, maybe a tent on top of a Jeep would work, or the hanging tents on mountains would work. But if just by doing this, now you are zooming into your problem space, zooming into the actual need, which is a shelter on the move, zoning a little bit more into your target audience, which are campers, you can go even deeper and check those campers. Who are they? Maybe they are mountain climbers, and that instantly cancels all those solutions that might create noise and make you focus on the exact product that you need to build. The MVP of your product, of the house that you started with, is actually a shelter for mountain climbers, choosing the actual solution that you came up with. So as you can see, we started here and we ended up here. That's why iterative design and continuous discovery and quick experimentation is very important, because whatever ideas we came up with at the beginning of the discovery phase is almost never not the thing that we ship at the end. We need to be laser focused for defining our problem statements and who we're solving it for, and keep iterating on those solutions and killing them fast so that we can reach the right solution for the right customers, which is something that we did at talabat. We were looking at reordering, and the problem statement that we wanted to work on one of the projects were, how might we introduce an intuitive and personalized swim lane for menu reordering? So just by using this problem statement, which is going back to how we build an MVP of a house, it was quite prescriptive. It said a house in that specific problem statement, saying a swim lane. So the team's first solution was swim lane. They put this cards on top of the menu screen, and they thought it would work. We have seen it working in other apps across the industry. And then the team went into a tailspin, making sure that every use case for that cards would work, and even experimenting with the copy, not even launching, because the scope getting bigger as they started discussing all those solutions. For example, what would happen if the past order no longer having one of the items, or the prices have changed, or how are we going to display big amount of items in our basket? And they went on and on and on, and then they decided, you know what, stop there. Let's test this prototype with our customers. Let's see how it works before building anything, before we go any further, because this is getting a little bit out of hand. And when they tested with the customers, actually users will swipe through it. They don't even notice that swim lane. So when customers come to the menu screen, they just go into the idea of, I want to select whatever I want to select, and they know exactly what I ordered last time, so I'm going to look for it, and they completely missed that swim lane at the top. So we went back to square one, and we looked at our problem statement, which clearly said, how do you build an MVP of a house? And we started defining that, no, we're not building a house, we're building a shelter. So we rewritten it, and kudos to the team for having that flexibility and agility. And they said, you know what? We are here to build an intuitive way to order from any restaurant. This is the actual problem statement. And having a co-located product team with engineers, with data scientists, with product managers, designers, they came up with a design solution that was actually the simplest solution. And how about we just introduce a new section called Order Again? It has the menu items, and you go through it, you select whatever you want. And they actually shipped it in less than 3 days. kudos to the team for doing this, and they just reused components that are there in the design system. That's also a very important part of empowering teams and enabling teams to iterate fast. They tested this idea fast. 3 days later, they found the impact coming very staggering and surprising, that our menu conversion rates have more than doubled by just introducing this section. Simplest solution usually is the right solution. And it goes back to well-articulated problem statement, which is another important mindset that we have to look at when we are approaching good design. I want to close by a very good quote from Stuart Butterfield, of course, as many might know him, the CEO and founder of Slack. He said, "What we're selling is organizational transformation. The software just happens to be part that we are able to build and ship," right? So he is not specifically talking about the solution, which is software. He's looking at the problem itself, or the challenge, or the mission, which is organizational transformation. Same as abstracting the problems to the next level and look after the higher job to be done that you're trying to cover. So to recap, design is a function of its medium and how flexible and malleable that medium is. And good design is a function of the time it takes to ship. So the longer we wait, the less impactful our designs will be. So we should always optimize to ship faster with every sprint, with every iteration. Good design is a function of number of iterations we can ship. It's almost impossible to get it right the first time. So the end goal for us is to keep iterating fast. And good design is a function of how well articulated our problem statements are. Because at the end of the day, good design is never done. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was a brilliant presentation, and finally we made it work without any technical issues. So thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Rory.
And it seems so both Lilia, Sophia, and Kamuhela have given some positive feedback there. So it's obviously
thanks, team.
Touched a nerve there. So brilliant. I would love to jump into some questions, because particularly there was a bit of conflict there between your talk and Paul, and I was going to ask some questions about like how do you avoid dead ends, like by going the wrong path and just kind of iterating into. Or the second one was, it's great when you're doing a little design, but how do you avoid that kind of Frankenstein design where you're always looking at a little piece? So then you've got like a Frankenstein, one arm, a different head, like, so it all is kind of coming together. I'm going to post those questions in our Slack channel, because unfortunately we are out of time, but I do hope that you can go in there and just answer those, because I'd love to hear your opinion on those.
Happy to.
But excellent. So that actually brings us to the end. So thank you very much, Rob, for sharing your thoughts. But we're going to close up now, and thank you for everybody who joined us. I'm going to finish off with a little bit of a plug that this was a small kind of show of what we do, but we do have a large conference every October in Dublin, where we have 50 plus speakers, 2,000 attendees, lots of workshops and everything. So if you did enjoy what we did today, please do come along. We also have another conference in the USA in May, if you prefer to head stateside. So thank you once again to all of our speakers, Paul, Matthew, and Robert, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, everybody.